98. We're in the Sheraton Hotel in Houston, Texas with the 12th Armored Division reunion. My name is Jason Hutt, and I'm here with Mr. Tomlinson from A Company from the 17th Armored Division. Mr. Tomlinson, let's start with the kind of a background of how you ended up with the 12th Armored Division and how you entered the Army.
I came into the 12th Armored Division as a replacement. And I was drafted into the Army and went through 2 basic trainings. That's 2, not 1, but 2. I was assigned to the Signal Corps when I first went into the Army and went through basic training in Camp Crowder, Missouri. At the end of my basic training, they needed some additional people in the infantry, so they classified the whole camp into the infantry and shipped us to Fort Gordon, Georgia for infantry training. And we went through infantry training at Fort Gordon and later was shipped overseas and joined the 12th Armored Division. And some of the instances that happened could be classified a night of confusion, or so many things during those times were very confusing and mixed up. In the heat of battle, there one night, this German Tiger tank turned the corner on this cobblestone street and caught Brown and myself, and we just jumped down on the ground, lay down on the ground to get out of the way of the tank itself. Well, ironically, the tank stopped right parallel to us, not 6 feet from us. And we were just helpless because an M1 rifle against a tank isn't much protection. So the tank was there just a few minutes, and the hatch raised up, and we could still hear the engine running, and the hatch squeaked. As German tanks historically did, I don't know, their mechanism was different from ours. They were noisier. But when the hatch came up, one of the fellows from the back saw the hatch raise up, and he jumped up on the back of the tank and dropped a hand grenade inside, and it blew up the people inside of the tank, and simultaneously the tank engine stopped running. Well, Brownie and myself got up and went to the left to a house that we started knocking the door in to get in. And as we literally kicked the door in, this German soldier jumped out and said, "Hi, Hitler." Well, he thought we were Germans because the Germans were there and we were there. Well, the poor fellow, when he saw we were Americans, the hysteria on his face, and just like the cat that ate the canary, was something where we told him, handy ho. In other words, handy ho means get your hands up. Well, he did, and dropped his rifle down to the side. And Brownie, really, it just infuriated him, and he was really ready to do damage to the fellow because Brownie was telling him that'll be the last time you'll be saying Heil Hitler. It really bothered him. But I was a little bit older than Brownie, and I begged him, said, don't do any harm to the fellow. He hasn't done anything to us. So we just left his rifle really laying on the doorway there, and took him back to the back. And they took him back to a camp. But it's kind of ironic and amusing sometimes that things can happen like that.
Now you mentioned that you went to Fort Gordon in Georgia, so you were not at Camp Campbell or Camp Barkley
No.
in Abilene with
Right.
Where exactly did you meet up with the 12th Armored Division once you got to Europe?
It was right before we went across the Rhine on the side of a hill, and I do not know exactly where because they took a lot of replacements out and just put us out at different locations and said, well, they'll pick you up here. Well, the A Company with Sergeant Sims was our squad leader. Shortly thereafter came up, and I climbed aboard the half track at that point. So it was kind of a impromptu thing, the way you get together sometimes.
What was that like being new into the company?
Well, it was that you're the last one down, so really at that time the half track was full inside, and I had to sit up on the top because there wasn't room downside. So the thing was, seemed like if you survived in an environment like that for maybe a day or two, well, you'd probably make it for a week or two.
Well, take us through a couple of your encounters there once you joined up with the 17th. Yeah.
Well, yes. There was one day that I was the first scout, and a fellow by the name of Tex was the second scout. Well, first I should say the German army had two ranks of soldiers. The Wehrmacht soldier, which was a regular soldier, say as we were, and the SS troopers were the stormtroopers, and they were quite often hated by the regular German soldier because the SSs were very cruel and mean and provocative people. But to go back, we were approaching this stone building, which was a two-story structure, and the field in front of it was just a flat field that had been apparently an agriculture field at one time. As we got closer and closer and closer, we got word from the back. They passed the word up that we were walking into an ambush, that one of the German, regular German soldiers, the Wehrmacht soldiers, said there were whole lots of SS troopers in that building waiting to ambush us. Well, when I heard that, I told Tex, I said, Tex, when I count to 3, turn and get back. Well, I counted to 3, and when we turned, I can't describe how they opened up on us with bullets just knocking the ground and rolling over and firing back and rolling over and then running and then firing back. In other words, you were taught to roll over and to fire and then get up and run 3 steps and then fall back on the ground and then fire. Well, I covered for Tex for a couple of runs like that, and then I missed him. And after that, my rifle jammed, and I was rolling over, and I took the oil tongue out of the butt of the rifle and ran the oil on my bolt of the rifle and started firing again, which incidentally was the first time I ever had my M1 rifle to jam up. So I kept running and firing and running and firing till I got really back out of the range of their fire. Well, when I got back down the hill, I started to get a drink of water out of my canteen, and actually it had been shot through with a hole through, and my canteen was 90% dry. And I reached back, and my fatigue jacket was ripped, and my wallet was gone. But I had all of my pilot's license in, and of course my driver's license and my family picture, and the little money I had was in there. Well, at that time it started getting dark, and so we just, some of the company commanders called for artillery to come up to, put artillery onto the building. Well, when nighttime fell, I didn't go up, but a couple of the men crawled up towards the building, and they found Tex in a foxhole in front of the building that he had evidently rolled over into the foxhole. Well, they apparently saw him when he rolled into the foxhole. Well, apparently he raised his head up, and when he did, they put a bullet. A fella had a bullet right between his eyes. They said you couldn't make any closer a proximity. But then we stayed there that night, and the next morning early they brought up heavy artillery and really blasted the house. And then we moved on from there. But again, we were taught to not stop under those conditions, to fire and roll over and run and fire and roll over and run and fire, but not to stop under those conditions. And poor Tex just made a bad mistake, but it was one of those unfortunate things that happened.
When you first get in battle, does that training that you receive come back to you? What goes through your mind? What are the things that went through your mind?
At that time, really, my mind was just more a blank, and instinctively running, firing, rolling, or other words, rolling across. In other words, you didn't give a person that's shooting at you time enough to get a good aim on you. So I guess the training, if you really pay attention to what you're being taught, it's probably that old subconscious mind that makes you do it without really thinking. But I guess really my mind was just at a blank until I got back to the side of the hill, which is, I'd say, a football field length away from the house. But the Germans, they had a single-shot rifle they called a Mauser, and they were so accurate with those things, just absolutely unbelievable how accurate they were. But there's another occasion there that's quite amusing. We'd been told that there were a mass of Germans in this place, and our company was just literally crawling through the woods there. And this day I was a second scout. I was back behind the first scout, and we had crawled for, I'd say, half a block. And all of a sudden I heard firing, rifle firing, bang, 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 bang. But I realized it was to my back. Well, I rolled over and looked back, and this young fella had jumped up. A deer had ran by, and he jumped up and started shooting at the deer. So, of course, that gave our position away, and we had to crawl real quickly back to the rear, away from where we were. But he didn't hit the deer, and of course he got quite a lesson from everybody. Said, "Don't you do that again. Quit shooting at the deer." There was another time that our medic Chamberlain was shot, and it was real tragic. And it was during a battle, and I heard someone calling for medic, screaming out, "Medic, medic!" Well, our medic was Chamberlain, and Chamberlain went up, and shortly, just within a minute or two times, so I heard a bang, and Chamberlain crawled back and said, "I'm hit." Well, they had put a bullet right between his red cross, on his helmet, right between the red cross, and the bullet went through his head. But he was still alive at that time, and he just said, "I'm hit," and blood was running down his face, and poor fellow, I pulled him back for, I don't know, 25 or 30 feet till some of the others got a hold of him and got him back, but he didn't make it. But really, that was real hard, and it brought on a lot of animosity. Some of the men, they were really real bitter, that they would do such a thing, and did bring on some reprisals from some of our men. I understand that, but there was another occasion there that this Armour Pearson kind of was going down through some buildings, and we weren't able to tell, exactly where they were. And our sergeant was Sims, and he told me, he said, "Tommy, you get around the side there and see if you can find out where the the piece is." I climbed around the side of the road and went up to where I thought possibly it was, and climbed up on a kind of a little lean-to roof, and the building went up, and it had a window there, which I intended to climb into the window. Well, I got up on the little shack roof and put my rifle up to pull myself up, and this arm came out of the window and grabbed hold of my rifle. And I thought at that moment, I said, well, I guess, this is the last, because they're going to probably shoot me. But this German civilian then raised over and said, "Come as he here, come as he here," meaning come here. And he actually helped me get into the window. Well, when he said, "Come as he here," he took me across the building to an open window and pointed down, and there was a German 88 cannon there with three German soldiers. And I told them, handy ho, handy ho. And the three of them raised their hands and didn't fire anymore. And Sims and the others came up back from the back street there, and they of course got them. But there's kind of an amusing thing. After the war, one of the three soldiers was a cook. They were cooking for us, and he was a big, huge fella. And the German other cooks were real amused, and they'd get to laughing that I was so little, and had captured him when he was so big, and they used to really give him a bad time about that. Kind of a amusing, interesting thing. But it was another time there during one night it was cold and wet, and we found it was a German farm that actually had hay and cattle in it, and really cattle gave off warmth, and that really was great when you were cold to get in with the warmth of cattle and the hay. Well, we went to sleep, actually went to sleep, and right at daylight we heard Germans talking. We heard German voices. Well, we laid there just petrified, well, what's happening? Where are they? But ironically, they went one way and we went the other way. So there was not a shot fired, and we slept there in the barn overnight, never knowing one was the other. There was another occasion that has stuck with me, and it's really something you can't get out. That this German soldier, as we were in a hay track there one afternoon, and the German soldier came from around this building, and someone shot him just at that moment. Not in our hay track, but he fell right in front of our hay track, and we ran over the fellow. And that crunching sound, I could still, till this day.
Was your company, or were you directly involved in the Battle of Herlisheim?
No, I went in right after.
You joined in?
Right after Herlisheim.
Right after. What was the mood like when you first got there in the 17th after the Battle of Herlisheim?
Well, of course, they had lost lots of men during Herlisheim. And that was one of the replacements that I was one of the replacements for Herlisheim. But the strafe, the first time that I ever knew there was a jet airplane, our column was going down this field, and we heard these explosions, and we thought we'd gotten in, to landmines, so we slowed up, thinking that, not to move, to get on any more landmines. But then what had happened, this German jet came down the column and was strafing and dropping bombs on us, and it happened so fast that we did not know that it was an airplane that did it until it was gone. And someone said, no, it was an airplane. So it was just complete surprise. But we were real fortunate because those German jets were just unbelievable. There on the Autobahn, they had caves dug out to the side of the Autobahn, that super highway, and they would pull those jets out onto the Autobahn to use as a runway when they saw a flight of the bombers, but they were real short of fuel, so they'd have to wait until they got just the right position of those bomber squadrons before they'd pull the thing out and go down the Autobahn. But they were short on fuel, so they couldn't stay up very long. But I very vividly remember 2 or 3 times when they would fly straight up underneath the formation of the B-17s and hit 2 or 3 of the B-17s and then go off and come down and land on the Autobahn. But one day one of them landed within 100 yards of us, but he really didn't make it. He crashed and turned over and went off of the Autobahn. But they had probably 100 of those jets dug back into the side of the Autobahn there. So had they had the fuel and had they had the experienced pilots, it could have been a different story, because they were ferocious things, I'll tell you.
Were those strafing runs common? Did you experience quite a few of those?
Not an awful lot. But you know, there was a German small reconnaissance plane that we called Bed Check Charlie. That thing would come over at night real low, and you could hardly see it, but you could hear the engine running, you know, to low RPM. And how in the world do they learn to fly that low, and particularly at night? We never knew. But you know, during the combat there, one day there was this elderly German soldier. I'd say elderly. He was less than my age, but he must have been 50. And he was wounded. He was bleeding pretty profusely from his side of his neck, and he was kind of staggering a little bit. And I tried to help him. He didn't have a rifle. He was walking back towards the rear, and I tried to help him, and he wouldn't let me help him. But he had 5 German Purple Hearts on. 5 Purple Hearts. Just think of where that fellow had been. No fellow had probably been to Russian front. But to be strong enough to not accept help when you're wounded, and he was really wounded, really severely. He was a strong person.
Other than your canteen incident, did you suffer any wounds?
It's absolutely a miracle. Absolutely a miracle that I was not shot. Now I was blown out of a building and landed and kind of, my nose bled a little bit, but outside of that, that's the only thing that happened to me.
How were you blown out of the building?
That was the 88 that I went around. They had armor-piercing ammunition, and they literally would go through 2 or 3 buildings and explode. And that's what, I was up on the 2nd floor, and that's what blew us down. I went down a flight of stairs, tumbling down a flight of stairs down to the 1st floor. But other than that, just a regular miracle. But I very vividly remember the day that President Franklin Roosevelt died. We were pinned down, and I was able to get on just a little cross-like place on my back, and I heard they passed the word up that President Roosevelt was dead. So the German soldiers thought that we would quit fighting if our president was dead. Now we didn't know at that time that someone had killed him, or that he had died, or exactly what did happen. But during this time, this particular day, and I was laying down, and they were throwing artillery on the hill where they had pinned us down with mortars, German mortars, and I could actually lay there and follow the projectiles of the 155s and they brought the 240 rifles up, and those things were going through the air. You wouldn't think you could see a bullet, but you actually can if you look and follow it close enough. But we made it back from that all right. Fortunately, it got dark and we pulled in, and our artillery was very effective on the hill where we had to stop. But I've had a real agonizing thing that my best friend during combat was Chuck Adelsberger, and I didn't know where Chuck was. This was a picture after the war ended.
Now, was he with the 17th?
Yes, this is Chuck here, standing on the ground. That's me on the back of the half track. 3 years ago, I went to the convention in Washington and got Chuck's address, and looked up his phone number when I got home, and called him and talked with him, and he seemed, real glad to hear from him. But he said he just couldn't come to the convention, and I called him a couple of other times. Last year, right before the Columbus Convention, I called him. Chuck lives at Tonawanda, New York, which is near Buffalo, and I told him, I said, well, Chuck, I'm going to go to the convention at Columbus, and it isn't too far from you, and if you're going to be home, I'd just love to come by and say hello to you. He said, well, Tommy, let me drop you a note. Well, in about a week, I got a letter from Chuck, and he said, Tommy, I appreciate you thinking about me, but said, each time you call me, said, I have nightmares if I combat for 2 or 3 days. And he said, I haven't told anyone about our experiences, our combat experiences, even my sons. I haven't told my sons or my wife. And my eldest son, which is getting married in 2 weeks, he's never been married before, but he's getting married in 2 weeks from the time you would be here. And I'm afraid if you came, I wouldn't be able to go to his wedding. So I have agonized for the last year of really what to do. I thought I should maybe call him and say, Chuck, just get it out, just talk about it, just don't keep it within you, because no doubt the fellow is just agonizing so bad. I either write him a note. He really, I feel, needs professional help. And I was told by Bill Funk, our unit leader, about the instance I had with Chuck, and he said, well, really, he isn't the only person that has that problem. But, during the service, our Sergeant Sims, he was a rough, awful person. I mean, I hate to say it, but he was. And he would give Chuck a bad time because Chuck's grandparents came from Germany. And he would cuss Chuck unmercifully, saying, you're not aggressive enough, you're slacking back, this, that, and the other, because your grandparents came from Germany. You're just not doing what you ought to. Well, Chuck would actually, he'd just break up, and I grabbed the hold of him and told him, don't let that fellow upset you. Overlook it. So evidently he's, harbored part of that also. But I wish there's some way I could help him, because I thought an awful lot thought an awful lot of Chuck. He's a fine person.
Speaking of that depression, are there times when it's hard for you to remember some of the, like you said, some of the more serious and incidents that happened to you, things like that? Are there times that they're more prevalent in your mind than others?
Well, right now, but after the war, I had a pretty rough time. At times I wake up, just kind of a jerk like. But as far as having any real problems with, say, like Chuck apparently is having, I didn't, fortunately, experience that. But it has been times that it's been real difficult.
What did you do when you got discharged, when you got home from the war?
I was discharged, came home, and went to work with a telephone company, back with a telephone company. And 3 months after that, I had polio. And I was completely paralyzed for about 4 months. I couldn't move anything. I was completely paralyzed. Well, eventually, I learned to crawl, and I literally crawled for weeks and weeks. But I eventually got over with it, and now, I'm 77 now, and I literally run up and down the hills around our house.
Did they ever figure out what caused this, or?
Well, it was well, I don't know, it was polio, but it was a bulbar type polio that apparently either kills you at the time or you slowly get over with it. But really, I contribute my recovery to a process they call a nurse Kennedy treatment, which an Australian nurse had developed a method whereby you take a 100% wool blanket and put it in boiling water, and they would throw that hot blanket on me and roll me up in it, and you mean hot. It was just right out of boiling water. So with the faith of the good Lord in that, the nurse Kennedy treatment, I contribute to recovering. But it's such a blessing to be able to walk.
Well, looking back now, in retrospect of the war and your service, what comes to your mind when you think about the entire experience?
Well, that I was able to contribute in a small way to the defeat of the German unbelievable atrocities that they did. I know one day we were close to this German concentration camp, and they ran up to us. It's a shoot. We didn't know what they were talking about, but they said we were Jewish, and they had the numbers, tattooed on their arms, and they were just skin and bones. Horrible situation.
What kind of emotions went through you when the company would find a camp like this?
Oh, just sickening. Absolutely, to think that a person could do something to a human being as cruel as that is just absolutely. It's just so sad. But I know it happened. Now there's some faction saying it didn't happen, that this conspiracy, that these things happened. Well, it did happen. Absolutely. They killed thousands and hundreds of thousands of defenseless people. Never understand it.
What are there any other recollections or memories that you have while serving with the 17th?
Well, it was an interesting thing when the war was over. They said, well, we'll go home. So we left Le Havre, France, and the ship sailed down the Mediterranean, and it was just, smooth as glass, and went out through the Straits of Gibraltar, and about half a mile out, the boat started kind of lunging, and I went, Brooke. I said, well, apparently something didn't agree with me that I ate. Well, we went another 30 minutes, and we were just going like this. The front of that boat would go up, and you'd just be up into the sky, and then it would go down, and the rudder, the screws, would actually come out of the water, and they would just Well, it did this for about 2 days, and one night about 1 o'clock the lights came on and sirens started blowing. Some of the seams in the bottom of the ship had actually ripped open, and they had to close the compartments off, and there were days that we would go maybe 4 or 5 miles forward, just enough to keep from going sideways. But I was so seasick. Well, even the crew on the ship was seasick, and 99% of the regular soldiers like myself were seasick. I made up my mind, frankly. I said, well, how ironic to come through the war alive, but said, really, if this thing goes down, I'm not moving from this bunk. Because actually the water was so cold, they said, really, you wouldn't last very long. But the aircraft carrier Wasp was off our side there, and when we got into New Jersey, they showed us some pictures of the Wasp, and it had gone wallowed down into the water and had torn the flight deck, that steel flight deck, the truth over the front, had torn that steel flight deck back. It was just up like this. It's amazing how strong the water can be. But it took us 2.5 weeks to come across the Atlantic, which normally would take, a week. But when we got into the New York harbor, the sun was just beginning to come up. Can explain the emotion of seeing the Statue of Liberty under those conditions. But we'd gone so slow. They put us, when we landed, they put us on an electric train. That thing must have gone 40 miles an hour, and it felt like we were flying because we'd been going so slow for so long. But that was really, really great to get back into America. We're just so fortunate to live in a country that we live in. We have our problems, but there's no place on earth like America. No place.
Well, Mr. Tomlinson, I sure thank you. And I think you have an incredible story. I'm glad that you shared it with us.